That was the strangest introduction ever, but that's all right. So I have to admit, that's an extremely arrogant title, How to Make a Better Teacher. I don't believe you can make anyone do anything short of intimidation and force. And unfortunately, I think that's actually beginning to creep into our profession. And so I want to address two ideas with you this morning that I think would move us forward in this. And one is a message for teachers, and one is a message for our leadership in how do we just basically improve the state of education for primarily our teachers, but no question what the impact will be for our students as well. And the other thing to note here is that you will begin to hear themes reoccurring, even beginning with our panel this morning and with Adam's talk. There's going to be some reoccurring themes that I know we all share, but perhaps we'll frame them a little differently. And that's my goal, is that these ideas could be yours to be able to frame in whatever circles you reside in. I think the other thing that's really important in this conversation is that we do a much better job, and instead of prescribing solutions to problems, we do a better job in describing. And so that's, again, what I want to do this morning. What I think you're going to hear throughout the next couple of days is people describing. We've already heard that. Their experiences and their beliefs in ways that then you can take ownership of as well. So for me, this really began about 24 years ago when I first began teaching grade 1. That's what we call it in Canada. I always have to say it first grade. That's the translation. It means the same thing, exactly the same thing. Little kids, right? And the challenge that I had at that time was, here I had 22 students who all had these incredibly diverse needs, and as Adam pointed out, they all needed an IEP. I knew that, but they didn't have that, and our system didn't really acknowledge me to provide that for them. Yet I knew deep down I needed to find a way to address their needs, and I just knew right off the bat I was not smart enough to do that. I didn't have the wherewithal, I didn't have the skills and the talents to do that. And I also knew at the time there was a phrase that had come out that I was just sort of beginning to understand, and this was this idea of a reflective practitioner. Now, I really didn't understand what that meant. What I had experienced up until that point was small occasions where I was able to have conversations with colleagues and friends during professional development sessions and occasional staff meetings, but they were so short that the opportunity actually to go deep with some of the things that I really needed to go deep with just wasn't there. And there's just no question that this notion of isolation occurs whether you're living in rural Canada or whether you're living in Manhattan. As a teacher in a classroom, it is an isolating profession. And so I continued to seek ways in which I could pursue these more deep conversations to help me become better as an educator with my colleagues. And it wasn't really until 7 years ago when I discovered this idea of a blog and decided to play in this space that things really began to blossom for me as an educator. This began a journey for me which continues to this day, where I'm able to explore the questions that are important to me, the ideas that I think are relevant, the things that I've done, the things that I want to do. And so over these past 7 years, through almost 1,000 articles, posts that I've written, and nearly 5,000 comments, I've been able to engage in this idea of deep reflection and conversation with trusted colleagues, with people that I know, with people that I don't know, who are able to provide me with all kinds of feedback that's been essential for my growth as an educator and as a professional. And not only, obviously, is this something that I've experienced, but I've watched other people experience very similar kinds of things. And a couple of my favorites that I want to share with you, one is Dan. Dan Meyer is a math educator in California who has been really interesting to watch his growth. He's a relatively young teacher, but he started this early on in his teaching, began thinking about mathematics education and how to change that. And Dan is just a tremendous person. If you have anything, and whether you're a math teacher or not, I think he's just a fabulous educator to be paying attention to. But I love what Dan says in his blog, that his lesson planning and blogging have become hopelessly and wonderfully tangled up. I think that's a fabulous way to frame what that space can do for him, that thinking and sharing out those ideas and being involved in action research is such a powerful thing. and being involved with community as well, which is again, an important theme that we're going to continue to explore in these next couple of days. And another educator that's a little closer to home is somebody that I work with locally, is Shelley Wright. And Shelley did something, I think, which is pretty amazing, in that she transformed her classroom, and as she states it, from a very teacher-centered classroom to a student-centered classroom. And not just, you know, that's a pretty, I guess, common thing we hear about student-centered classrooms, but what she did was document that in extremely detailed and vulnerable ways in which she expressed the challenges that she faced that weren't perfect. It was extremely messy as she went through this process and talked about what that meant for her students, but also what that meant for herself, and that she experienced a loss of control and what she knew to be teaching and the change that she was about to, that she was in the midst of undertaking. So I would strongly recommend looking back at her journey as she's walked through that and as she's had conversations with her colleagues as well in her journey. I think it's a tremendous testament to the power of these kinds of spaces in her own evolution as an educator. About 5 years ago, we had the privilege of having a movie filmed at our house. That was quite an experience in many ways. And there was a number of little perks that went with that. One of them was that we actually got to go sit pretty closely with the film crew as they were filming. And it's amazing to think about what goes into 30 seconds of what you see on screen, or even 10 seconds. All of the people involved, all of the cameras, all of the extras, the numbers of times that particular scene gets reshot over and over, and to see that actually kind of takes away some of the mysteries, I guess, of a movie. And yet Hollywood doesn't really want you to see all of the stuff that goes behind there. They want you to see the final product and sort of totally be immersed in that experience and not understand all of the intricacies and challenges that go with producing a 90-minute film. I think sometimes as educators, we've got caught up in a similar mentality of trying to showcase that which is perfect, the end result. Here's what's going to happen at the end, whether it be a student or instructional strategies and models that we present and share. We want to look at the finished product, and yet I think that's a really harmful attitude and posture to take. I don't think we are magicians trying to hide an act, with apologies to Chris for that really poor Photoshop. I'm not a Photoshop expert, but I just thought Chris just had this magician-like face to him that I thought I'd throw in there. But we're not magicians. And we need to do a better job of explaining our craft and deconstructing it as what we do every day. And this isn't something that's, again, just something I think is interesting, that I think could be useful. It's been explored by a lot of people as of late, understanding that this is really, these spaces where teachers are interacting really have the potential to elevate our profession in places we can't even imagine. Andy Hargraves talks about this as being the key transformation, is establishing these innovative networks and this hacking culture really suggests to us that teaching is a difficult profession. It doesn't come with answers. It doesn't come with a handbook, as perhaps maybe we've been led to believe. Here's the lesson plan, just go ahead and do this and all will be well. As we understand the need for individualized instruction, for personalizing learning, for empowering our students, we realize that comes with extreme complexities and challenges. And so these networks offer what I believe is a hope for us to move beyond where we are right now with education. Yet I think when I want to just spend a little time talking about our leadership, that in many cases we're not getting the support, we're not getting being provided the agency from our leaders to move forward in this way, and they're not acknowledging the potential of that. Speaking of our leaders, there's no question that Finland of late has been getting a lot of notoriety for the work that they're doing. And rightly so. Tremendous gains and tremendous education they're providing for their students. But one of the things, as I hear leaders talk about what works in Finland, one of the things that often gets ignored is their whole notion of this word accountability. And in the book Finished Lessons, Pasi Sahlberg says that, in fact, in Finland, there is no word for accountability. That accountability is what you get once you take out responsibility. That is such an important idea, this idea of responsibility. And it would change everything, as he says, if we could just start talking about being responsible as opposed to accountable. I've attended a lot of meetings at the district level, and as I work with districts across North America, and I've yet to have anybody frame the word accountability in a way that's inviting at all. And I've had leaders really try to say, well, no, it's not a punitive term. It's not meant to be that way. And yet no one has been able to explain it to me and express it to me in a way that comes across as anything but something punitive. And it completely brings about the notion of distrust. And not only is distrust an incredibly toxic thing to have in an organization, but it also comes with a big cost. I mean, we live in an incredibly fearful society, and fear being fostered through distrust and other things is costing us in dollars, really, but also just in terms of our own morale and our ability to move forward. And I really think that if we can kind of move towards a culture where we're sharing and trusting, that we don't have to think about accountability because it'll just be there. And I believe that our teachers already come with an inherent sense of responsibility, that we just need, as leaders, to bring that out from them in the ways in which we conduct business and the ways in which we treat each other. One example of that is a superintendent that I've had a few conversations with of late is John Gateman from Greater Victoria Schools in Victoria, British Columbia. And John's done some really interesting things with middle school, in fact, where he's provided his teachers an opportunity to be action researchers. And one of the things that he said to me, just a couple of really poignant ideas, is he talked about the fact that when his teachers come to him with a question, an inquiry about something they'd like to pursue, that any question is the right answer, that he's willing to provide them funding and support to pursue any idea. And we really miss this idea. We talk a lot about student inquiry, but I think sometimes we forget about teacher inquiry being as equally as important to that. And the only obligation is not to write a report or fill in any kind of things, but the only obligation that his teachers have is to share that amongst each other. He doesn't need to know exactly all the things they're doing. He trusts them. He wants to give them an opportunity to do those kind of things. And John Walensky also talks about this notion of sharing being not simply for those people locally, but we have an obligation as educators to extend that to as wide a circulation as possible. And when teachers can begin to think of themselves as action researchers every single day they're in a classroom, because that's what you do every day. You're involved in action research. You do things with students. You try things. You observe. You reflect. You share that. That can make all of the difference in the world, and again, in moving our profession forward. So let me just leave you with a couple of things to think about. For teachers, I guess the question I'd like to pose to you is, where and when do you make time for deep reflection and revealing those secrets and questions surrounding your craft? And for leaders to think about, how are you honoring teachers' inherent sense of responsibility and providing ways for them to restore agency and professionalism to their calling, which I really believe in many cases is something we are losing, that notion of agency and professionalism. So as leaders, there may be one little thing that you do to help restore that. I don't know what that might be, but I think that needs to be embedded in the DNA of your school, your organization, that's something that you're devoted for. And I'm not seeing that in the ways that I want to. And even as we think about moving forward, this is something I'm really fond of saying with my own students, is that I don't know that we can measure learning, but we can document it. We can share it. We don't necessarily have to crunch it into something as a finished product. But I think if we simply pursue the documentation and the sharing of our learning, and make that as widely available as possible, I think we're on the right track to something greater for ourselves and our students. Thank you very much.